welcome to Elevating the Game of Good. My name is Vanessa Topizer, and I'm a Senior Vice President at IMI International. We're so happy to have you here. We have people from brand, from charity, across different industries, and we're thrilled that the content on charity and cause is really interesting across all of the groups. So as we go through, we had a lot of questions upon registration. There were an onslaught of questions that came in, which we were really excited about. So we'll get to those at the end of the webinar, and some will also be answered all the way through. But if you do have any questions along the way, please put them into the comment area, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. If we can't get to them, we will definitely follow up, or feel free to follow up with us. We're always open to a great conversation, especially as it relates to helping charities and causes and brands really accelerate and drive their impact. So before we dive in, we do have a number of new faces in the crowd. So just a little bit of context about IMI, because again, it's about you. It's not about us. But just some context is we're an independent consumer insights consultancy with the core purpose of insight driving profit. And our mission is to drive impact and growth for organizations led by insight. And we do know that there is an art and a science, and we always keep that in mind too, as we are driving solutions for our clients to best enable them to move forward. We work across a number of different industries with over 200 clients around the world. And either we work with some clients on one singular need, whether it be a concept test or messaging, or all the way through the marketing process, from initial discovery through the confirmation, through to optimization, and making sure that your ROI is optimized while you're in market and beyond. We also have a very strong passion for charity and cause. We study on our own about 300 different charities, and we do work with partners within the charity space across a number of different areas. So market landscape and strategy, sponsorship and partnerships, program and event measurement and optimization. And we also do speaking engagements, just depending on what the client needs. So just a little bit of context on us to get us started. And the last thing that I'll say before bringing Laura Janes to the stage is that the majority of today's content really comes from two sources. One is from our proprietary resource in IMI Pulse, where we measure 1,200 different passion points, 400 categories, 800 brands. We have 80 different causes and charities that are in there, so we can slice and dice the data depending on what your vantage point is and how you're looking at things. And then the other source is our not-for-profit brand health and optimization study. And this is continuously keeping a pulse on what's happening in the cause space specifically. So without further ado, let me bring Laura Janes to the stage, and she's going to take us through why we're here today, which is elevating the game of good, how brands and charities can turn intention to action. Take us through it, Laura.
Thanks, Vanessa. Great intro. All right, I'll take it away. So thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to talk elevating the game of good, how brands and charities can turn intention into action. So we're going to start kind of high level, and what do we really mean by intention to action? And in the start here, we're going to have a little bit of fun. We use this analogy a lot at IMI. It's the intention to action gap, as you will. So an intention refers to a thing a person plans to do or achieve. Here we've got 6, 7 guys and gals on a cliff. They look ready to maybe jump in the water. So they're in their bathing suits. They're looking at the camera, maybe saying, "Look at me! I'm about to do it." So they have intentions, at least it looks like, to do that dive, to make that jump. But we've got one guy who is taking the action, the fact of process of doing something. So really, by intention to action, we mean, how do we get more of these sunbathers that are on the cliff into the water, like this guy who's ready to go? He's got his feet in the air and somehow is flexible enough to hold them up. So it's really about how do we drive that intention into action. And we know that the reason we talk about this is because we know there's a say-do gap in a lot of areas, but specifically we see it a lot in this causal space. So what we see time and time again, and we've been measuring this for decades, is that there's a strong passion for this space. And Vanessa talked about it in the introduction, that we at IMI have a strong passion, and so do consumers in Canada and the US and really globally. In fact, 9 in 10 North Americans believe it's important to support causes. What are they doing? Well, yes, 1 in 2 are actually have supported a charity, and that support could be in many different ways: volunteering, donating, talking about, even fundraising or participating in an event. But we do see a bit of a gap. 9 in 10 saying it's important, they have the intentions, but only about half have supported. And obviously we want to, do good in this space, and everyone on this webinar today and even beyond, even those who can't make it, it's an important space. And so how do we get more of those cliff people into the water and diving, maybe not with their, holding their feet, but how can we understand how we can drive that intention to action and drive that support, drive those actions overall. So this is kind of overall that say-do gap, but we wanted to provide an example specifically within this space for a specific cause. And we'll focus on cancer. I'm sure many, unfortunately, on this call have been impacted in some way by cancer. In fact, 54% of North Americans believe it's a major issue. This is a major issue. If you go to issue at all, it's even stronger. But being a major issue, it's significant. Over half of North Americans believe cancer is a major issue. So this is really a tangible example of this gap. So how do we look at what that gap is? How many have supported any cancer charities in the past 12 months? There are a lot of cancer charities. There's, Canadian Cancer Society, we have provincial, we have local, some that are specific to a certain cause, some that are specific to cancer overall. But we've got 47% in the past 12 months who have supported a cancer charity. When we move down the path to those who have purchased a product because it supports a cancer cause, and you'll see that come out as we talk about donations and different tactics to drive that action. Now we're at 38%, so still over a third of people, but we are starting to see some of that gap from it's a major issue for North Americans, but only about a third have done so in the past 12 months. And probably the most important gap here that we're really seeing is, the frequency aspect. So, it's a major issue. We know this is a space that Canadians and North Americans overall care about, but only 16% have frequently supported cancer charities. So really, this is about, if I take it back to that analogy, is not even just getting more people in the water, jumping in the water. Are they doing different dives? Are they, diving from different locations? So it's about how can we drive that frequency across different levers that we have: donation, fundraising, volunteerism, as well as across different audience groups. So there's lots of different ways that we can drive that action by focusing on what's most important. The opportunity we really see is to drive a long-term connection across all of these different touch points. And so what we'd like to take you through today is help you uncover the critical insights across these essential facets of the not-for-profit and charity space as you climb to your North Star. That North Star may be slightly different, but it really, at the end of the day, is doing the good, regardless of charity, whether it be cancer, whether it be heart, whether it be environment, ensuring that we're really focused on driving that action because we know the importance of this space overall. The levers that we've identified, and I know most on the call, we know that the key levers in the charity and not-for-profit space, but where we really have key insights and best practices to help you understand how to drive action across each of these levers. So donation, increasing revenue for your cause or for a cause if you're a partner of a cause. Volunteerism, so really fostering those connections on a one-to-one basis. Speaking of one-to-one, even fundraising, so driving momentum through your events and even driving donation through those events. And then finally, revenue and alliances through partnerships. So what we've really identified is, these 4 key areas where we have really strong insights and best practices that we'd like to share with you today. In prepping for today, we realized we have a lot to share. So what we're going to focus on today is the donor side, so the increasing revenue, as well as the fundraising side, so the driving momentum side. But if you know us well, we can't really leave a stone unturned. We will give you a sneak peek for volunteerism and partnership, but there'll be a second phase, which we'll talk about at the end. We'd love to have you back. So we're going to focus on those 2 today, but more to come. And there will be a sneak peek on volunteering and partnerships overall. So we'd like to start quickly with just some overall market realities, just to kind of really put in perspective, in 2025, how are people thinking and feeling? It truly is astounding that every day, and this number has increased, I think almost every day, over 2,500 touch points that influence us. Everything from family life to work, health, money, and more. So there's a lot in consumers' minds. And we know this, but it's important to keep it in perspective as we think about that intention to action gap. There's a lot of areas that we need to think about and understand that are on consumers' minds as we think about how to drive that action. So what's on their minds? Well, in fact, many things. 90% of people have concerns or issues across not just one, actually on average, it's 20. Everything from finance, health, social, tech, and the environment. And what's interesting here is we have causes and not-for-profits that focus on many of these spaces. We have children's literacy in the finance space, social from a mental health perspective, environment, animal welfare, environment, climate change, and all those types of things. So there's many different themes and realities to keep in mind, but they are important to keep in mind as well because they are also touch the cause and not-for-profit space. So 2,500 things in our minds on a daily basis. I'm sure some of you have even more. Where does cause fit within the reality of 2025 and what's on consumers' minds? Well, we talked about intentions. If we bring that to kind of a North American view from a population perspective, we actually have over 260 million North Americans who want to support charities. Yes, there's lots on their minds. Yes, there's a significant amount of touch points. Those touch points we can leverage as part of the not-for-profit space, and we'll talk about that, but it certainly is a space with strong intentions. You've heard a lot from IMI, many of you on the webinar today about the tariff war. We've had several webinars in that space overall. And if you haven't seen them, please have a look at our website. And I believe there'll be a link posted within the chat. But one thing we can all agree on, despite everything that we see, depending on what side of the border you're on, Canadians and Americans both believe it's important, over 90%, to support charities. That hasn't changed. It's been 90% for as long as I can remember. So we have those intentions. Again, if I bring it back to that analogy, many want to jump in the water. It's about how do we drive that action to do that. One of the areas we're going to focus on a lot today through the two key levers that we'll dive into are some differences in audience as it relates to action. But when we think about intentions, the fact that we have strong intentions, again, north and south of the border, this also rings true across all demographics and geographics. It doesn't matter, gender, age, income level, country of origin. We see that the intentions are strong across the board. But what's important is to understand, where do those intentions lie overall? We have intentions to support causes, but where specifically? Well, here we look at the top 10 important to support. And you can see, just like what's on our minds, we have many different causes that Canadians hear, but we see similar results in the US as well, from health research and illnesses, mental health, children and youth, poverty, all the way down to disaster relief and response, seniors, and environmental. This list can change, depending on time of year and even day. But overall, what you see here is a variety in terms of areas people want to support. So it's not just that we have intentions overall, but there's depth in terms of where we're looking to bring that support. But there are nuances on what rises to the top, depending on who your audience is. So knowing what these differences are can help you better connect. And as we get to the action, you'll see that there's even more nuances in terms of who is my audience and how do I drive that action, that connection with that specific audience. So let's take intentions before we get into action and look at just some differences that we see across a few different demographics. Again, overall, 9 in 10, again, regardless of any of these groups, have strong intentions to support charities. But if you look at those with kids in the household versus those without, you can see some slight differences. Children and youth, probably not a surprise, rises to the top among households with kids. It's not at the top for those without kids, but it's still number 5. You may be an aunt, you may be a cousin, a grandfather, whatever it may be. Children and youth is still an important cause overall to both of these audiences. It just may be about the different ways you message, as well as what your specific cause, what you talk about in terms of how you drive impact in your community and for Canada at large. So that's, based on life stage or children in the household. We'll look at a little bit at income as we go through this webinar today. You can see here that whether you're lower income, health research, or higher income, health research and illness and mental health both rise to the top. But you can see a slight difference in terms of what's the strongest. Again, it doesn't mean that if you're not in the top 5, you're not important to that audience. It's about what's really just rising to the top a little bit more than maybe with others. So for lower income, homelessness comes in at number 3. And then those with higher income, homelessness again is still in the top 10, but poverty, hunger, and nutrition. So a slightly different vantage point, and maybe different messaging, something to keep in mind as we think about how we talk about a cause. If you're a cause that kind of focuses on all three of those different areas versus one, what is that vantage point and what is the message that I need to deliver to that audience to ensure that I'm driving that action? Let's look as well as at those born in Canada versus foreign-born Canadians. Many of you have probably seen Vanessa and I on our series webinar on newcomers. And one of the interesting insights we found there was the difference in terms of mental health for those born in Canada and foreign-born Canadians. So again, in the top 5, number 2 for those born in Canada, number 3 for foreign-born Canadians, but the messaging and how that comes to life may differ based on what we know about those born in Canada and some differences that we see for those new to our country. And then last but certainly not least, we'll look at generations, and something certainly that'll come into play a lot as we look at the different actions. So whether you're Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, or a Boomer, health research and illness and mental health rise to the top, but you can see that children and youth are among the top 3 for Gen Z, Millennials, and Gen X. But then for Boomer, seniors comes to the top. Again, probably not a surprise given the categorization within these different age groups, but it's really about ensuring that we have a vantage point and we're connecting with each of our key audiences on what's most important to them. What's really important to understand here is that while there are some nuances, there are a lot of similarities in the overall intentions, specifically as it relates to age. Where you'll see some differences about to come is on some of the actions that are taken across some of these different generations. So at the end of the day, what we have in common is a desire to support, but there are nuances on who they are, where, and in terms of the tactics, and even in some cases, why they're supporting or why they're even not supporting in some other areas. But as we get into the actions, know that you can bridge this say-do gap. We've seen it, we've measured it, but it's truly important to have an understanding of who your target audience is and why and where they're doing different things that can really help you drive action and really get your message across to deliver on those different actions. So let's move to donors and increasing revenue, a key action within this space and a key source of revenue within the not-for-profit space overall. I know I've shown this chart before in different webinars that we've done, but donating continues to be the biggest way Canadians engage with charities. There may be many different reasons for that. Sometimes if it's a one-time online donation, can be a bit easier. It's a big revenue stream. Another reason it's a big space is because there's a lot of different areas within the donation lever as it relates to charities and in the cause space. You have one-time donors, you have your monthly and or annual givers, we have major gifts, we have legacy, we may even have different donation streams depending on your vantage point. But really the important point here is that there are multiple ways to build your donor base, but each comes with a different strategy. Again, it's about understanding the who and how you can best engage with them so that we can drive that revenue across each of these different levers, again, even within the donation space. What we know is that we've asked Canadians and Americans, do you prefer a one-time, a monthly, or a yearly donation? This is preferred. So probably, again, not a surprise that almost 7 in 10 prefer a one-time donation. That's their preference if they had a choice. But we still see about 30% that would prefer actually a monthly or a yearly donation. So this is not about put all your eggs in one basket, only talk about one time. It's about having different strategies for those groups, understanding who they are, and ensuring that we have different strategies and tactics across donation overall, but as well as within each of the different levers, whether it's one time, whether it's monthly, whether it's legacy, to ensure that we're driving action across each of those individual levers. And this actually is consistent. So what are the themes you'll see today is there's a lot of consistency, but there are nuances, again, depending on your vantage point. So there are similarities we see here regardless of demographic. Where we do see differences overall on overall intentions to donate money to a charity. We see, about 50% for both millennials and Gen X, higher on the Boomer side and a little bit lower on the Gen Z side. We still have 45% of Gen Z who are likely to donate money. We're not saying that that's not an audience that we should focus on, but it's about the low-hanging fruit and where we see opportunity just from an overall starting point across each of our different generations. So this is overall intentions. Let's get into some of the specifics around how they have done so in the past 12 months. What we're looking at here is the top 2 ways each generation have donated in the past 12 months. And you do see some differences, but again, some similarities. Gen Z are more likely to buy a product. That's their number 1 tactic, they've told us, to support a charity, or directly to someone participating in an event. So for them, it's about products. It's about one-on-one connections with people. And so something to keep in mind as you develop your strategy from a donation perspective with that specific audience. We look to millennials and Gen X. We see some similarities there, donating at a store and then making a one-time online donation. I think life stage potentially comes into play here. If you have kids in the house, you're probably in more stores, or you're making an online donation because of time, or children and youth is particularly important to you, and you're being asked to donate to that space specifically. There's lots of different reasons, but the important thing here is that we do see some similarities and some differences across audiences. And last but certainly not least, we have boomers. They're number 1, they said, is buying a lottery ticket that supports the charity. So maybe a little bit there of, I've been giving for a long time, and here's my chance to maybe win something if I, support this charity. But it's a bit of fun and experience that comes into play there too. But one-time donation online is also a key tactic with that audience from a donation perspective. So really what we would say is that think about your relationship with each of these different age groups and that specific tactic that you're looking to engage them with as a stepping stone to what the future could be. If you build that relationship early, again, by early, we don't mean just with Gen Z. We mean with each of those different audiences, depending on what your strategy is for that audience and or for that tactic. And that can really help drive impact for your cause or your charity. So that's generation. Let's now take a look at the relationship between income and likelihood to donate. It's probably not a surprise that we see intentions to donate a little bit higher. It's still very high, 51% among lower income households, but it rises to 65% among higher income households. There's probably many reasons for that. More disposable income for one. Age can play a role. The older you are, you're further along in your career and you're more likely to be in a higher income bracket. But it also could be you're asked more. People know where you are, know your age, they know you've supported charities in the past, and so you've been asked, and so you have donated more. Speaking of being asked, what we do find is while there are differences in overall intentions to donate from an income perspective, there are certain tactics within the donation space that are created equal. If we look at likely to donate at a store through a program, where often you are asked, would you like to donate to support our program? We see it at many stores across Canada and even in the US. We don't see differences here in terms of 36% of lower income and 38% of higher income. So in-store tactics or asks from a donation perspective can help you cast a wider net for donation potential as it relates to different income levels. So some similarities, some differences as it relates to income level. So maybe I know my audience, maybe I'm still trying to uncover what that may be, but how do I drive a connection once I do know my audience? Well, one thing we see in this space a lot, or we know in this space actually, is that connecting in a meaningful way is essential because for many, or for most actually, it is personal. If we ask Canadians, Americans, how likely are you to donate $100 if you know someone personally impacted by insert cause? We have almost 2 in 3 saying, yes, I'm very likely committed to that. It's even more if you say somewhat likely, but 62% if they know someone. So knowing someone, having that personal connection certainly drives that action. But equally what can drive that action is if a charity can clearly define who it helps. What's the impact for Canada, in the community, for my family even, that can have as strong of an impact in terms of really getting your messaging clear, getting your visuals clear, and ensuring that you're really demonstrating the impact that you do have on the specific audience that you help. And here's a specific case for the Heart and Stroke specifically, and we've done this across many different charities, but those less familiar are still likely 9% likely to donate if they're unfamiliar with the Heart and Stroke. If we look at those who are somewhat familiar, so they may know a little bit about the foundation overall, that rises to 24% likely. And then if we look at those very familiar, that goes to 41%. So you can see the more you can build your donor base by driving familiarity for your brand. this is something I spoke about in more in depth in our last webinar. So I think there's a link, or a link will come for that one. But certainly there's a lot that charities can do from a messaging perspective to really drive that familiarity. And what it really comes down to is you have to communicate and build the familiarity. If you are not out there, you don't exist. So campaigns, social, one-to-one relationship building, events in store, some of these come with more costs, but there's some ways we can, reach audiences and drive that familiarity more cost effectively. There are many ways to drive the connection. It's ensuring that we're clear and ensuring that that clarity really drives and comes through with our target audience. And just a couple final thoughts on the donation side before we head into the fundraising side. One of the principles we have at IMI is how little do you need to spend, or maybe in this case, do, to really drive impact. I think this is really something that resonates specifically with this space as a not-for-profit, but how can we simplify but still maximize our donor efforts? Well, one thing we've learned, and here's just a quick example, that a small change really can make a big difference. So what we see a lot in this space is, you go on to donate to a specific charity, to someone participating in an event, and we see different ranges listed on the website, 10, 25, all the way to maybe $250. If you've reversed that on the left-hand side of this chart and start with the higher amount, whether that be 500, 250, the example here is 250, we actually see an 18% lift in the amount donated. It's kind of a consumer psychology way of looking at it, but just that small change can really maximize your donor efforts, which at the end of the day mean you have more revenue to help those in need and those you support. Another way to simplify, if you will, in this space, and this is my colleague David Hudson did a webinar around this time last year, I believe it was, around the world in 30 minutes. And one of our core principles at IMI that he spoke about was you don't always have to start from scratch. You can rerun strong campaigns. In fact, the average or median unaware of a campaign that we've seen globally is 68%. And I've actually seen that number higher in the not-for-profit space, specifically meaning not a significant proportion unaware of the efforts that you put in to this, whether it be a donor campaign, a legacy campaign, whatever that may be. We've tested many campaigns that existed, last year all the way back to 15 years ago. And that what we found is that if a campaign is effective, there's more of your target market that has not seen it. But what we know from a metrics perspective, impact on favorability, consideration, many different areas, brand equity, donation intentions, if it connects, you can rerun it because chances are you had a strong impact. We just need to, drive stronger connection, stronger awareness of your program. So in a nutshell, repeating ideas certainly can work, and it can certainly help you maximize your dollars and your resources behind all the great work that you're doing. Okay, let's move to fundraisers and driving momentum with this group specifically. So remember we talked about in the donation side who was most likely to donate, which was boomers, and there are many different reasons there. If we look across the different generations from a likelihood to raise money or participate in an event with a charity, we see millennials coming to the top a little bit. Gen Z and Gen X are still strong there, and still 30%, again, of boomers willing to do so. But it's about the low-hanging fruit and even strongest with millennials overall. So if you're looking for fundraisers, millennials are your strongest participants overall, and you'll see some differences in terms of how those come out across generations, but they can really help you drive the revenue, and they can help you create that word of mouth that can really help you, again, maximize the dollars and resources that you're putting into any given campaign, any given event. Really, it is a win-win. So let's look at some of the different, we looked at different donation types. Now let's look at different event types and Canadians' propensity to participate in these different event types. So the number one, probably not a surprise again, is Charity Walk or Run at 49% likely to participate in this type of event. But we've got number two, charity event through your employer. And those with the keen eye may recognize that's the IMI team at the Road Hockey to Conquer Cancer event last year. We had a great goalie. He's there right in front. But what we've really found is that charity events through your employer can really drive that employee engagement. So especially in a hybrid world that we live in right now, working from home, people are really craving those connections. And that's really one way that, we can get people together, but also help support a cause. So it really is truly a win-win. So, charity event through your employer is one way, but even charity walks and charity runs, we can have employee events that do that. In fact, the IMI team is participating in one in just a couple weeks. And what's really great is it actually touches on the walk run. And we've got a little bit of a competition happening with, we've got a walking group, we've got a runners group. So we're really hitting on all three as it relates to driving impact for charities. But what it really shows is that there really is opportunity to hit the mark on all three of those different areas. So just like we did with donations, we also looked at the top 2 ways different generations are likely to participate in these different events. We saw the top 3, but does it change from an action perspective across each of these different age groups? And in fact, yes, it does. Gen Z are most likely to participate in a fundraising event through your employer or a team challenge or sporting event. Again, many probably different reasons there. The older Gen Z audience is probably new in their career, looking to make connections at work, especially if they are working from home or even working from home 1 to 2 days a week. The younger generation tends to maybe be a bit more likely to participate. They want to show off their sporting skills that they had in high school or university. They want to show that they're a team member as part of a team challenge. Millennials fundraising event through your employer. Again, I think the newness in your earliness in your career is a part there, but charity walks, number 2. And then Gen X, we see charity walks and biking and cycling events comes up as number 2. And then for boomers, we've got the trusted walks and run being strong. So really what the key message here is that, yes, we see, strongest intentions with millennials overall. Yes, we see, charity walks being number 1 in terms of overall propensity to participate. But depending on your key audience, again, you see some nuances in terms of what they're most likely to do. It doesn't mean if you're not number 1 and 2 with Gen Z, we can't, do a biking challenge, for instance, with that audience. But here's where they're most likely to participate and where their ears and eyes are maybe paying a bit more attention to events specifically in that type of space. We looked at income as it relates to donation, and we see some differences, but also some similarities here as it relates to lower and higher income households. So those with higher income are more likely to participate in charity walks versus lower income. But again, it's still number 1 with lower income. But then for lower income, we see charity biking or cycling events rising to the top a little bit. So again, it really just depends on your vantage point, who your target audience is, and how you can reach them and really drive that action. But we know a lot of charities have many different events. And so what we would counsel is to consider each event as a brand, where each contributes differently, but meaningfully to your overall success. So here's just a few examples for Coke with their portfolio, Virgin, and even Apple. As I look at this, I realize they really have me. I think I'm kind of in on all of those different bubbles. But I imagine they have a strategy across each of those different groups or tactics in terms of who the audience is, how they're going to reach, even what that message is. So think about your events portfolio in the similar way that a for-profit brand would think about all the different brands within their mix as well. And actually, we're in the midst of conducting a study in the event space, understanding from charities and even brands who partner with charities, some of the challenges they see in this space, what's working, what's not working, with the idea of how can we learn from each other. And here's a quote from that study with that exact point on the previous slide. Each portfolio offers a unique and meaningful way for supporters to connect to their cause in a way that resonates personally with them. Each program empowers people to fundraise their way, all while driving awareness and critical support for our cause. Oh, sorry, I'm having a little bit of a tech issue here. But what we found is this can really apply universally to all your programs, not just your events. Because when we think about donation, fundraising, or volunteerism, on the previous slide, we're at about 10 to 15% across each of those aware of a cause. But if you take each of those together, donation, fundraising, volunteerism, we're at about 1/3. So your group reach is actually greater than you may think. So ensuring we have a strategy and a tactic across each of these levers and even the levers within can certainly help drive that action going forward. And to take it even one step further, when you consider all of the different ways that you connect, so through volunteering, through fundraising, and through donation, but also through the different campaigns you have, your online presence, the one-on-one connections that you have with consumers or even potential donors, your reach is even greater than you think. In fact, on average, across the over 200 charities that we've looked at, your average reach among those aware is just over 50%. And so certainly something to consider as we think about that overall strategy, as well as the tactics that can help you drive that action and capitalize on the intentions to drive that action. So I promised a little bit of a sneak peek on volunteering, which foster connections and partnership and optimizing alliances. So let's take a quick sneak peek at these two key levers so that I can leave you with something in this space, but please come back and we'll talk about it at the end in terms of part 2 of this webinar in terms of driving intention to action. So another guiding principle that we have at IMI is the best idea for your brand, for your charity, may be already out there. You don't always have to start from scratch. You can learn from the success or potentially, I don't know if I should say failures, but things that have happened to others that you can, tweak and really ensure that you can maximize your efforts overall. So let's look at that from a volunteering perspective as it relates to fostering connections. One thing we know in this space is making it easy, whether it's making it easy to donate, making it easy to volunteer or participate in an event, is really a key building block in the cause space. When we look at our cause brand health study that Vanessa alluded to at the beginning, here's the top 3 that rise to the top. The Salvation Army, food banks, and Terry Fox Foundation. It's not to say if you're not on this list, you don't make it easy, but here's the top 3 in terms of making it easy. So what can we learn from them and to make it easy? I know Terry Fox has different leadership programs, for instance, for elementary versus high school students. My kids have just completed it, so I've been a bit more, looking at the website and getting an understanding of the Terry Fox run, but there's certainly a lot we can learn from each of these different charities, and even those that don't make the top 3 in terms of how we can make it easier. But one thing we've looked at a lot across these efforts is, similarities, but nuances across different audiences. So here we're looking at Terry Fox from a Gen Z and millennial perspective. We don't see any differences as it relates to easy to volunteer. Canadian Blood Services is a little bit higher with Gen Z, whereas United Way is a bit higher with millennials. If we think back to that tactic of, participating in an event, in the 2 previous companies I worked for, I certainly participated in United Way. They do, in my perspective, make it easy to participate and engage employees. And so millennials are seeing that. It's not that Gen Z don't, but even more so, we're seeing that with millennials. So again, consistency for some, but differences as it relates to making it easy to volunteer for others. So let's take a similar approach as it relates to partnerships and optimizing alliances. One big area in the partnership space from our sponsor Pulse team and even IMI, if you know us, we look at metrics around impact, like impact on consideration, favorability, and your equity. In the cause and not-for-profit space, there is one unique element that comes out, which is if my company partners with this cause or this charity, does it make me feel better about my employer if that partnership exists? So similar to what we looked at from a volunteer perspective, here are the top 5: food banks, Canadian Cancer, Sick Kids, Canadian Red Cross, and Kids Help Phone, as it relates to feeling better if I work for that company and my partnership, if I work for a company and they partnered with that charity or not-for-profit. But if you don't exist on that list, it doesn't mean you're not driving that impact. If we look at example here at some different children and youth causes, so Children's Miracle Network, we don't see a difference as it relates to those born in Canada, to those foreign born, but we can see foreign born Canadians are a bit more attuned to feel better about their employer through a UNICEF partnership. On the flip side, those born in country in Canada, Ronald McDonald House Charities rises to the top or is stronger overall. So again, it doesn't mean you can't drive these feel better about your employer attitudes, but where we see the kind of that low-hanging fruit and some commonalities and some differences depending on the audience and depending on the brand or not-for-profit. At the end of the day, all charities have the ability to reach and drive action with key audiences. What we've really found is ensuring that you're focused on who, what, and even how you're delivering to drive that action that can really help you move the needle and drive your brand or charity forward. So there are a lot of similarities and differences that we've seen. It really depends on your vantage point. So knowing where those commonalities are and where those nuances are is really essential to driving that long-term connection. And if we can just leave you with one final insight, it's the importance, again, of understanding how these levers all work together. And actually, we did have a question that came through, and Vanessa and I will get to it in a couple of minutes, around moving volunteers down the spectrum to donors or to fundraisers. And so what we looked at was those who have volunteered on average for a charity and their likelihood to engage across different tactics. And so you see they're almost twice as likely to donate. They're almost 3 times likely to follow online or on social. They volunteered, and so maybe they like the experience and want to kind of know more. They're more likely to purchase merchandise for that charity, and they're 5 times more likely to participate in fundraising and events. And you could look at this across different angles, but what it really says is ensuring you have a strategy and a focus for each of these levers can really help you drive that long-term impact across each of these different levers. So what now? If we could just leave you with 3 things, 3 areas, really to ask yourself based on everything we've gone through today, is do I have a strategy across each of these levers and even the elements within? So if it's donation, monthly versus one time, legacy, if it's events, is it across my different, do I have an event strategy overall? And then for each specific event within, and how is it similar for some? Is it different for others? Do I have a clear understanding of the target audience and how I can reach them across each of these levers? And then we'd be remiss at IMI if we didn't talk about metrics. And do you have the right way to understand if you've delivered against each of your strategy and your audience, and again, versus each of your different levers? So I know I promised it throughout. Stay tuned for part 2 in early 2026, where we'll talk again about this intention to action gap and really how we can get more of those people into the water diving in. But we will dive into volunteers, fostering connections, and partnerships from an optimizing alliances perspective. So please join us again for that webinar. We'll be excited to see you again.
A lot to unpack there, Laura. Thanks so much for taking us through all of that. I mean, I think at the end, we definitely have a strong passion for cause and charity. And you specifically have a very strong passion for cause and charity and a lot of knowledge in the space, helping a lot of our partners as well. So that's amazing. I mean, it always comes back to, who are you going to talk to? How are you going to connect? And with what tactic? Because depending on who you're looking to talk to, the tactics will change. But there are some that are consistent. What do you need to say to drive that familiarity and that clarity that you need to have for your cause and charity? And where do you need to be able to connect? And before we get into questions, there's a little anecdote when I was thinking about when you were saying,
I love anecdotes.
well, about rerunning the campaigns.
Yeah.
There's, when I was leading Minute Maid at Coke, we had a partnership with Breakfast Clubs of Canada, and we had the person that was leading Minute Maid before me built a campaign and an ad around Minute Maid and Breakfast Clubs of Canada and that morning occasion. And it was an ongoing joke because it was an incredibly successful ad. And we tried to sort of pivot into something else because we felt that the ad had reached burnout. And as it turns out, the ad didn't reach burnout. It was still one of the most successful campaigns at Coke at the time. And we aired it for almost 4 years. And so there was a constant joke that the little kid in the campaign was actually going to be a teenager by the time we took this off air, but it was so effective. So, you can marry the two together, brand and cause, in a very effective way, and reusing what you already have and not having to start from scratch is really sound advice. So thanks for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. Before we jump into the questions, because we just want to give you guys a little peek behind the curtain of what's coming up from IMI. One is Powering Business Growth, the Pulse on Canadian Sentiment. And Laura talked about this before, that we have been reporting on what's happening with Canadian sentiment right now, given what's happening around the globe and with the US specifically. And so we will have that coming out in the next week or so. And so if you want to register here for our newsletter, we'll be sure to get that into your inbox. We also have a few other things coming up, a lot of questions about Gen Z. And so how to effectively reach and resonate with Gen Z will be coming soon, and that's in November. So stay tuned for that. And then also diving into wellness and that say-do gap with wellness, because there's obviously there's a health and wellness trend that's going on, but as there is the say-do gap with charity, it's the same as it relates to wellness and buying behavior. So a little bit more on that. So just wanted to give you a sneak peek behind the curtain of what's coming up from IMI before we get into questions. So do we want to dive into questions, Laura?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So we did have a number of questions that came up upon registration. Why don't we go through them first? The first is, how do we communicate the good that we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is one of the first ones that came through, which is a very important question in this space. And what we would counsel there is the importance of your messaging. That, that thinking back to the heart and stroke example, building familiarity. If you build it, they will come. But it's not just building it; it's about being focused and clear in building that and talking about the impact that you have. We know through I know we've talked about it a couple times now with the different tariff decks that we've had, but local community, especially in Canada, is specifically important. So even if you're a global charity or national, the way you can demonstrate the impact in your local community, that doesn't have to be, I'm in Pickering, Ontario, it doesn't have to be there, but it could be in your broader community. It's really about just really trying to talk about the impact that you have on the people that you're doing the good for.
Yeah, definitely. We get that question
Mm-hmm.
a ton. The second, so hopefully that answers the question that came from actually a client of ours. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, then as you know, we're always open to the conversation.
We've got lots in that area, so we'd be happy to kind of chat that through, even offline or online, but in a different format.
Yeah, for sure. The second one was, how can brands, companies commercialize the B Corp status or sustainability initiatives? And obviously lots that we can talk about on sustainability as well. And Dan Hunter from IMI released a blog on sustainability as well. So check that out on our content site if you're interested. But the question is, how can brands, companies commercialize the B Corp status or sustainability initiatives, both with retail partners and with consumers and shoppers?
Big question.
Let's unpack that for a minute. This is from the agency side. And so, obviously a lot of considerations if you're an agency working in the cause space on what to effectively communicate and where, when, how, and why. So Laura, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it really, again, it depends on, the answer, it depends, but it really does depend on the audience. Does your, target consumer even know what that means? And they may have heard of it, but are they familiar with what it means and how it impacts your category, your charity, et cetera? And so, again, that principle of learning from others, what have others done in that space and how can we learn from them? We know, for instance, the DFC logo, I know we're not talking sustainability per se on that specific element, but we know that resonates. And so does that translate to B Corp status? And is there a way we can use visuals if it is something that resonates with our audience to demonstrate that? So it really does depend on your key audience and what your vantage point is. But, based on everything we've seen, it can be something if we're demonstrating the impact that does have on your target audience.
Yeah, and retail is a big conversation as well as it relates to cause and charity. And we have some questions around partnerships and how to get into retail. We know that that donation at till is really important. So if you are at till and you do have that alignment with the retailer, what are you going to say first? Is it going to be B Corp status? Probably not.
Right.
It's going to be about your cause and looking to connect in that personal way.
But there may be a place for it depending on your tactic. And your overall vantage point.
Okay, so the next question is, it's actually from a property, which is really fascinating as well. So is the traditional event sponsorship model obsolete? And I mean, we can say no, it's not obsolete, but it does have its place. When brands get better data from commercial events, should charities pivot to building value-added partnerships that are completely independent of events? I have an opinion on this. Laura, what do you?
Go ahead.
I don't. So you can get data from commercial events. I mean, we measure events all the time. So you can get data on how it's moving the needle forward. In terms of should you pivot to building added value partnerships, really, if you can make them work hand in hand, I think that is the perfect solution. Bringing something to life and that one-to-one interaction, generates that momentum for your cause or charity. And if you can bring people in with an event that gives them that feeling about your cause, gives them an amazing experience with the people they're around, it's going to drive donations. It's also going to drive word of mouth. It's also going to drive momentum.
Yeah.
The other side is that it is, it's a higher lift. There are more expenses that go into it. There's more energy that goes into it. And so if you can couple that with value added partnerships, I mean, partnerships are an incredible way to create reach for your brand and for your cause or your charity, in partnership with the right brand. And so finding the brands that the consumer aligns with, that you're looking to reach, but also from a brand side, understanding what the consumer or potential consumer of your brand aligns with from a cause perspective, that's really where the partnership can be very strong.
Yeah.
And if you can find those strength of partnerships, you don't want to get overly saturated, but creating those, in-store campaigns, packaging, promotions. And, Laura, you did present a little bit earlier, Gen Z, but the way that they have donated is by buying a product that supports the charity. And I'm just looking at the slide right now. And then it's directly supporting somebody in an event. And so, and the millennials by donating at store, Gen X by donating at a store. So there is a role for both if you can make both work.
Yeah, I think exactly. There's a time and a place for both. Both can work. And some require more resources. So it's about a balancing act of your target audience and, being able to deliver on what you've promised for this event or for this commercial event overall.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, again, anecdotally, when I was working in the charity sector as well, so when I moved from Coke to charity, there was events that we had, but there was also sustaining campaigns that we had with all of our partners as well. And so lots of learnings from that too, if you are interested. And I know that came from a property. If you're interested in some of those learnings, we're happy to have a chat. The fourth question is the importance of PR in a digital world. And this came from a brand perspective. So Laura, do you have a perspective on PR?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no PR that's bad PR. There is, but this is certainly exposure is important. We talked about, again, familiarity and really driving connection, and PR can be a key way to drive kind of that earned media and really drive the momentum and amplification for your brand. But it can really help, drive that familiarity. So it is an important, but again, nuanced area that charities should consider, but it can be another way to engage consumers now for potentially the future, depending on what that lever may be.
Yeah, definitely. The earned media part of that is critical, and familiarity. And so if you do get your name out there or your partnership as it relates to perhaps your perspective, person who's asking the question, that does help with the momentum, as long as it's meaningful to the audience. And from a charity perspective, if you do have a front runner in your cause or charity that is really good in front of the media, or you do get media training, making those media connections can also really help with that organic reach. And we've seen that time and time again. So the fifth question, and I think we have a little bit of time. We can ask a couple of more questions here. The fifth question is, how can purpose-driven cause partnerships enhance brand loyalty in functional CPG categories like personal care, where consumer decisions are often driven by habit and utility?
Well, I know we've looked at this on our pulse. We seem to be having many. We've looked at it on our Pulse platform, And if you look at actually purchasers of various different CPG categories, whether personal care, whether home care, we actually see that the relationship between community and partnerships is very strong, and it actually can impact over 50% of consumers. So yes, it may be a bit more difficult. There's different ways it can come about, but it certainly can have an impact from a community perspective and really create those one-on-one connections with your consumer base, which tends to be a large audience. We all need to do our laundry and clean our homes. So there's certainly opportunity from a reach perspective, especially as it relates to that broader community.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I'd add to that is that it doesn't necessarily surpass, trust, value, promo, price, making
Oh,
people
absolutely.
feel
Yeah.
good, but it can be a lever to
It can be a
driving that
lever.
trust, and it can
Yeah.
be a lever to driving that, making people feel good. And
Yeah.
we do know that local right now is absolutely critical. So driving to that local messaging within your charity and cause would be critical within that partnership. And the numbers I think you were talking about, Laura, were from personal care purchasers specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. But we
So
see it similarly in other categories as well. And yeah, the other final comment there, and Vanessa, it's one of your, excuse me, one of your one-liners, if you will, but you can't build a brand on an asset. So yes, price, trust, reputation, all those things are also important, but it can be a building block, even in a CPG category, to really help develop your brand from a charity and cause perspective.
Yeah. It can also be a tiebreaker, perhaps at shelf as well, if you're thinking about it like that. So let's go through two more. We had so many questions, so we'll have to maybe follow up with some of them. If we didn't answer your question, then please feel free to reach out. Again, we're happy to have a conversation. But why don't we do two more? The first one was, with higher uncertainty in the economy, are there signals that consumers are less likely to donate to charity? And we had a great conversation about this one.
We did
yesterday. Laura, do you want to? How about you take that one?
Yeah, I think it's again about that intentions into action kind of analogy, if you will. So the cliff divers, we haven't seen a decrease in overall intentions, and in certain tactics, absolutely, it really depends. But overall intentions to donate are still there. We know that some charities have seen it. Have seen a decrease in donations. It may be overall, it may be in terms of frequency and or amount. There's lots of different ways to look at it. But what we have seen an increase in intentions, but also actions around, again, that local element. So it doesn't have to be within your specific community, but if you can talk about and demonstrate the local impact that you have, that's something that consumers have their eyes and ears open for and are looking to. They still want to help. Yes, they may be pinched when they open their bank account or at the till, even at the grocery store, but they still have the intentions. It's just about maybe tweaking messaging around how can I think about what's on consumers' minds in 2025 and 2026 and really ensure that I'm driving the impact for the now and not maybe where they were a couple of years ago, because we know the world changes, and so we need to ensure we're changing with the intentions and the actions of those consumers.
So again, that local. If you have local messaging, or you are a national charity, but you do have localized components, leaning into that, Canadian right now, specifically for Canada, and North America, but leaning into that local will be absolutely instrumental. Okay, so question number 7. This is the last one. Maybe we'll just
lucky number 7.
Lucky number 7. We'll end on this one. Are there any techniques for converting volunteers to donors? And this came from a property specifically. Again, we have so many interesting questions coming from so many different vantage points. So, thanks for joining and being.
I think I saw that one came through an NSO, if I'm not mistaken, actually.
It did.
Yeah, which is actually a great, because we know NSOs have lots of great, we've worked with many who have a great volunteer base. And so how do we, convert? And if I think about that kind of somewhere, remember that triangle slide of those who have volunteered are more likely to especially participate in events, but also donate, also follow online. And even engage in charities, your charity in many different ways. In terms of tactics to do that, your volunteers know you from a volunteer perspective, that they have familiarity with you from a communicating and how can I help and what are the different ways. Maybe you've been a volunteer for many different years, but it's about getting to know your volunteers from a donor perspective, or making them familiar with you from a donor perspective. So they know you as a volunteer, but how can you communicate the impact that you have? And if you donate $25, $50, $100 today, what impact is that having? I know the impact that I'm having as I volunteer for this, insert NSO type of event or even charity event, but what is the impact that you're having for that broader community? Ensuring that you're driving the familiarity of what you do with the funds. And again, it's not about, we've talked about this a lot as well, it's not about percentage of admin fees that do or don't go to the cause. It's about the money that you are bringing in. What are you doing with that? And how are you driving that impact? You're really taking it on a positive angle is here's what we've gotten. Here's what we're going to do now and going forward to drive impact on our community.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that's all that we have to go through today. Again, thanks so much everyone for joining us and for sticking with us all this time. We really appreciate it. And thanks, Laura, for all the incredible insight. Again, so much to unpack and very actionable and salient insight. Always appreciate your perspective on the cause and charity space. And everybody, look out in your inboxes for round 2. Exactly. And for all the other pieces of insight and topics that IMI is going to be chatting about over the next little while. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.